Welcome to today's South-South program. I'm Bill Miller. One of the main goals of South-South News is to focus attention on unique economic and social developmental activities that are taking place, especially in the economically developing countries. Today, my guest is someone who's very involved in trying to help create a better world, not only in the developed countries, but also in the developing countries. Mr. Roland Rich is the Acting Executive Director for the United Nations Office for Partnerships. Mr. Rich also is the Director for the United Nations Democracy Fund. Roland Rich, welcome to South-South News.
Thank you, Bill. Pleasure to be here.
I appreciate you being with me. Let's start right at the top. What is the United Nations Office for Partnerships, UNOP? What does it do? Why were you started?
Okay. Actually, we've got to go back a little bit further than that and start with the UN Fund for International Partnerships. And this was a fund that was created in 1998 to be the counterpart for the foundation that Ted Turner began. So it really begins in 1998 when Ted Turner decided that he wanted to work with the UN on supporting UN projects, supporting causes of the UN in the field. And he and Kofi Annan discussed this issue, and it was decided that Ted Turner would establish a foundation, the very well-known UN Foundation, and that the interface for that foundation is that office, the UN Fund for International Partnerships. Now, what happened was that the example that Ted Turner showed was followed by many others. That is, he showed that it was important and possible for non-state actors to work with the UN. And over time, quite a lot of these companies and philanthropic bodies came to the UN, and that's why the Secretary General felt it was necessary to create an office to deal specifically with that phenomenon. And that's the UN Office for Partnerships.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned Ted Turner. Many of our viewers will remember Ted Turner was really the founder, the creator, the brain trust, I guess, behind the founding of CNN.
Yep.
Cable news network, which is a very successful cable news operation. And as I recall, he donated 1/3. He was worth about $3 billion, and he donated $1 billion to set up the UN Foundation and then ultimately to spin that off, which is really a remarkable contribution. When, of course, that's a lot of money, but by the same token, when you give away 1/3 of your wealth, that is a commitment. That is certainly a commitment.
It's a tremendous example. It turned out that he basically committed $1 billion, and the UN Foundation has been spending off that money. They've also done something else very interesting. They've been able to leverage that amount of money to attract third-party funding. And many corporations and actors, especially in the United States, give money to the UN Foundation to support UN activities. Why? Not directly to the UN. We can't provide tax deductibility the way the UN Foundation can. So it makes sense for corporate actors especially to give money to the UN Foundation, which then supports a whole range of UN projects delivered by a whole range of UN actors, UNDP, UNICEF, UN Women, UN Fund for Population Activities, etc.
And it's also very difficult, as I understand it, to make a contribution directly. Ted Turner wanted to donate $1 billion to pay off the United States legal arrearages to the UN, and he couldn't do that because it was not set up to do that. An American citizen could not do that. So,
you know, I've heard him actually speak on this, and there was another little rider to this bill, which he explained to Kofi Annan. He was going to pay off the US contribution that was in arrears, and then sue the US in federal court to get it back. And Kofi Annan said, you know, Ted, please don't do that. You know, you'll get us into more trouble. But if you want to help the UN, you're welcome to help the UN. So that's where it began.
That could be a legal quagmire, to put it mildly. It certainly could.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the United Nations Office for Partnerships. We'll come back to the philanthropist in a few minutes, but what exactly do you do? What types of programs do you engage in? Who are some of your key partners?
Yeah. Well, let me make a couple of obvious points first, Bill. The UN was designed in the middle of the 20th century and was designed for states. Here we are in the second decade of the 21st century, and we all know that there are many actors out there beyond member states. Philanthropists, corporations, NGOs, and so forth. And so it's important for the UN to be able to deal with these bodies. And the UN has evolved over the years it's not just the UN Office for Partnerships. There are many other parts of the UN that are able to deal with these sort of actors. But it's a critically important part of delivering the UN product. I mean, just one little fact is quite startling. The Gates Foundation spends more money on health than the World Health Organization. So that tells you a little bit about how important these non-state actors have become in the world that we live with. Now, the way we look at this is we try to use the strengths of the UN. And when you think of the strengths of the UN, they are, firstly, the convening power of the UN. If the UN calls a meeting, people come to it. And I'll give you one example of what we do here. Every 2 years, together with the UN Foundation and an organization in Boston called CERES, we host the Investor Summit for Climate Change. And this is a summit of Wall Street and other financial institutions that are looking for ways to invest in green technology, invest in ways to avert climate change. They bring with them literally billions, I think it's actually over $1 trillion worth of investment funds. And this is a very high level one-day forum that we host here at the UN that maps the way forward in relation to green technology and how we can actually use it and make a profit in that way. And you know, the developing world in particular has been faster than the US in trying to innovate in this field. China, for example, now produces more solar cells and for solar energy than does the US. So that's just an example of how that development's taking place. So we use the convening power in that way. The UN also has tremendous legitimacy power. And this is, I think, another important way that corporations want to be involved with the UN. So big players like, you know, Coca-Cola or Walmart or Dow Chemical, they think about, well, how can we get involved in relation to our corporate social responsibility? What can we do? And they do many things, but one of the things they want to do is work with the UN because they want to be associated with that UN brand. It's good business. It's good publicity for them. And we try to use that, to leverage that, again, to support UN projects and causes.
Mm-hmm. And that's something that has changed dramatically throughout the whole UN system, I think, over the past probably 15, 20 years. Years ago, a lot of businesses had somewhat of an adversarial attitude about UN agencies. The pharmaceuticals, for example, did not like the World Health Organization. Today, they work closely with the World Health Organization, but it seems that there's a mind shift taking place that a lot of these corporations realize that it's in their best interest to work with an organization like the United Nations, who's really trying to improve people's lives and to create a better world. Have you seen that take place? Is it actually out there happening?
It's certainly happening, Bill. And I mean, let's, you know, again, if we trace it back to the early days of the UN, let's admit there was an ideological issue
Cold
involved.
War. The Cold War.
And one of the attacks was on these you know, multinational corporations and so forth. But we have to be honest and say that there was an element of truth in the attacks. That the multinational corporations were somehow falling between the legal jurisdictions. They may be incorporated in one place, they're acting in other places and so forth. It was critically important that there be some institutions and mechanisms beyond just national jurisdiction to be able to deal with these situations. And that's where another tremendous innovation of the UN, the Global Compact, comes into play. The Global Compact is, if you like, the UN's way of telling the corporate community there are some fundamental rules out there about human rights and protection of the environment and anti-corruption and so forth, and we want you to comply with those rules as well.
And now the Global Compact, as with almost all the UN operations, is a voluntary type of thing.
Yes. Businesses
can join. I think right now there are over 6,000 businesses from not only developed countries, but the developing countries too are participating quite actively.
Well, my colleague Georg Kell is making a really big push to bring the developing world corporations on board, and in fact it'll be next month in Istanbul. There's a very big conference of focusing on the least developed countries, And the Global Compact is in a sense hosting the corporate element of that, trying to get the corporations working in these least developed countries to get involved. And one of the reasons is, you know, in the poorest countries, the workers are the most vulnerable. And yes, of course, the major protection for those workers must come from the governments of those countries, but another form of protection is the UN telling the corporate community, please treat these people in accordance with human rights and so forth.
Mm-hmm. And that is extremely, extremely important. I was thinking about the United Nations Office for Partnerships, and well, first off, I'm sure a lot of our viewers are thinking about it too, and they would like to go, they can go to un.org/partnerships.
Yeah.
Is that where they can get more information?
Absolutely.
Okay. And I know you can't name names because if you do, you have so many different people involved and corporations involved and what have you. Yeah. But what are some of the projects that are underway right now that folks can look at to say, aha, here's something tangible that's going on that is really going to make a difference in the lives of the people in this particular country or this region or in even a larger area?
So let me give you an example, actually, from the Caribbean region, this is an example where it's obvious that not one set of actors can solve a problem, that you actually need a partnership with different range of actors, and it's based in Haiti, and Haiti has quite a large mango crop, but the market's quite small, and the phenomenon that people looked at was the mangoes are just, you know, rotting on the trees. Coca-Cola stepped in at the request of Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton is the UN Special Envoy to Haiti. He uses that UN convening power pretty well, and he's got a bit of convening power himself, actually. Yes, basically, Bill is terrific at bringing people into a room and getting things solved. And I think the first meeting actually happened at Davos, and under the sort of UN Office for Partnership umbrella, they found a process whereby Coca-Cola's partner in Haiti would create a new product, a mango juice, called Haiti Hope. You can buy it in the shops here in the US. And by this way, most of the mango crop now gets used, and the mango farmers of Haiti have about doubled their income. So that was a very tangible, obvious thing that could happen. Coca-Cola invested quite a bit in this, but it may well be that at some point they might even turn a profit, which is fine. The important thing is the farmers in Haiti are getting a return on their crop.
Mm-hmm. And they, along with everybody else, need as much economic investment as possible to create employment opportunities because, of course, we saw the tragedy that befell Haiti with the earthquake and some other problems, but with the monsoon and
this is a good news story about
Haiti. It really is, yes,
Yeah.
It certainly is. Well, it sounds like you're really doing some interesting work. And now, how many projects do you have around the world, roughly? Just more or less.
Well, the UN Democracy Fund has many projects around the world, about 400 now. But the UN Office for Partnerships basically works with our partners in various ways, and so we don't count the projects, we count the partners, if you like. And we work with a number of philanthropic bodies. You've mentioned a few already, the Gates Foundation and the Clinton Global Initiative, but also the Synergos Foundation, which is associated with the Rockefeller family, and some other foundations that work with us. There's an organization called TED, T-E-D, Technology, Entertainment and Development, I think that the acronym stands for. And there are other foundations, the Louise Blum Foundation and so forth. So we try to work with a lot of these foundations. We have a wonderful partnership with the UN Foundation, which is the core of our business. And a lot of American corporate actors work through the UN Foundation in support of the UN.
Mm-hmm. And the one theme there are a couple of themes, but the main theme is that there's a role for everybody, and this networking and developing partnerships is absolutely critical. And no one person, no one government, no one corporation can solve the problem. We all have to work together on this. Yeah. And this is a new concept. It is a new day. It's not the Cold War era that we experienced back in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, at the early 80s at the United Nations. Yes. It's certainly a different world. Yeah. And those partnerships that you mentioned are so very important. You mentioned Bill and Melinda Gates and how they're spending more money in the development or on the health projects than the World Health Organization. They have more money to spend to start off with, but the important thing too is that they're working with groups like Rotary International and other UN agencies like the UN Children's Fund, UNICEF, along with the World Health Organization, to eliminate polio, the scourge of polio and other childhood diseases. And this has been a multi-billion-dollar project, as we're both aware, but it really makes a difference when you pool your resources and work together, because everybody comes to the table with certain strengths, and that is so very critical.
Well, let me give you another example of that. Some years ago, the UN Foundation actually entered into partnership with the NBA.
The National Basketball Association, really?
Absolutely, and it's all about nets. And we know in basketball, you know, that when you hit your three-pointer and it's nothing but net, that's a great shot. And what the work that the UN Foundation is doing is getting nets to people in the global south to fight malaria, because basically the Anopheles mosquitoes will bite you at night. And if you're protected when you're sleeping, you've got far fewer chances of getting malaria. So that's been a terrific program, mainly throughout Africa. It's called Nothing But Net.
And this is a program people can participate in.
People can participate. And there's another wonderful UN Foundation program which is specifically targeted, this is so interesting, Bill, specifically targeted at American teenage girls. It's called Girl Up. And it's a program that will help girls in other countries, Africa, the Caribbean, some Asian countries, working with UN Women and UNICEF. But American teenage girls can participate in this program, get involved, donate, work out what's happening and so forth. It's a tremendous initiative, and as a part of the UN, we certainly hope that we will have millions of supporters of the UN in years to come from this program.
Mm-hmm. Both great programs, and people can actually participate and can do it very inexpensively. And so I'm hoping that people will look into it and pursue it. We're talking about these partnerships and what you're doing, and that's a main focus of your life right now. You're wearing two hats today, really. Your other hat is on the UN Democracy Fund. Tell us a bit about the Democracy Fund. What is it? What do you do? And why was it started?
Yeah. Well, the Democracy Fund, it's distinguished certainly in one way. We're the only part of the UN that carries that word, democracy, which again I think was controversial in the Cold War years, but is no longer controversial, and everybody understands that it's ultimately part of the solution. Our part of the process of supporting democratization around the world is funding projects that strengthen the voice of civil society. So again, being the UN Office for Partnerships, we tend to work with non-state actors, and in this case it's NGOs from the Global South. And every year they apply for funding, and we have a difficult, exhaustive process to select the best projects, and we fund those projects. Thus far we've got about 400 projects we've been funding around the world, and we've spent about $100 million. So again, just like all the other programs we're mentioning, these are all voluntarily funded programs. They're not part of the UN regular budget. And so it really means that the donor community out there has to dig deep, keep funding these programs.
Mm-hmm. Now, when we talk about democracy in any type of political system, obviously that can be a very touchy area. It's very sensitive. I assume you work with the governments also. If a group applies for project funds, that you also work in coordination with the government. Is that correct?
We advise the government.
Advise the government.
We advise the government. It's a particularly difficult relationship, governments and civil society. So we have to be careful in that regard. But look, the projects we fund are excellent projects, and they do terrific work. I mean, a lot of the groups that we target in these projects are from marginalized communities. So we fund a lot of projects for indigenous people in Central America and Latin America. We're funding a project in Gabon that will, for the first time, register the pygmy population to vote. and they've never been registered to vote in the past. They've always been sort of on the outskirts of society. We've done even projects in Europe in support of the Roma people. So, you know, they're the sort of projects that we like to fund, are voice projects in support of the most needy.
Now, in a situation like this with the Democracy Fund, do you have some type of mechanism set up to evaluate the effectiveness of the program, to see the successes, to see where some of the obstacles may have been, or some changes that perhaps need to be made along the way?
You know, that's been one of the the big discussions that our board has had over the last couple of years, and there was a debate in the board: should we ask UN colleagues to evaluate these projects, or should we go to the commercial world? And the decision was to go to the commercial world. So we have a company, I think they're doing a great job. It's a company based in Brussels called Transtech. And our requirement is that each project they evaluate, they must bring an international evaluator and a local person who understands the local context and so forth. And they basically look at project impact. We don't ask them to count things that's been done by our auditor, but they look at the impact of the project, and so far they've I think evaluated some 15 projects for us, and you know, it's pleasing and disturbing, but it's mainly pleasing that of those 15, 2 of them were rather negatively evaluated as weak projects that didn't deliver what they said they were going to deliver. But for me, it's useful to know those things as well, to know why projects don't deliver, why they fail. We can learn more from the projects that fail than we learn from the projects that succeed.
That's exactly right.
So, and secondly, it shows us that Transtech is actually, you know, an honest broker in that process. They're not there to please us or anybody else. They're there to do their job.
That's right. Not there just to paper over any differences or problems, but to actually resolve them. And if the projects don't pay off, then they should be eliminated. Well, Roland Rich, you're doing some really exciting things with the Office for Partnerships and also with the Democracy Fund. And I'm sure a lot of our viewers would like to go to your website, un.org/partnerships, and learn more about it. And I'm sure that many of the folks from the economically developing countries are going to see there's a major role for them to play, as well as there is a role for the people from the economically developed countries. But Roland Rich, thank you so very much for a very interesting and a very informative program.
Thanks, Phil.
I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us on South South News.